I apologise for the black square on the screen, but the audio for my introduction was not recorded, so I've had to make a voiceover instead, and that voiceover obviously wouldn't match my original webcam view, so I have removed it. Anyway, hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and even though I post my videos on YouTube, I don't really get into the whole Youtubey stuff very often. But occasionally, every now and again, it's good fun to lean in that direction. I've done the occasional list video and challenge video over my time, and today I have another one of those challenges. Specifically, I had planned to paint an entire army in 24 hours. Oh, so difficult, so clickbaity, thumbnail, yes, yada yada, all of that nonsense. Although I didn't end up painting these in a single 24-hour period, so maybe you consider that cheating. Instead, I painted every single day for an hour or an hour and a half every day, and I got them completed, which is a far more normal way of painting. I'll be revisiting the kind of times that I spent on this again throughout the video basically, but for the moment let's look at the army in question. This is the Warlord Games Imperial Japanese Army for bolt action, the 6th and my final main army for me to paint for bolt action. I have built up a few of the plastic sprues, including rifles, light machine guns, officers, and lunge mine, and I also have the CO cast weapons team featuring a flamethrower sniper and the anti-tank bombers, and on top of that I have the metal anti-tank rifle team from Ratman. My favourite unit in this army so far was actually made by cutting the legs off of a bunch of the models and making little dimples in the bases with some milliput, and this is to make it appear like these models are climbing up out of spider holes. And after all of that, you can't expect me to make a video without mentioning Conflict 47, at least a little bit, certainly not right now, and so I have some kitbashed shibito made from various Warlord games and Stargrave parts. So all told, this is 50 models, well more than just the 30 from the infantry box, and plenty for me to get stuck into. So with 50 models to paint and only 24 hours in the challenge, in theory, to paint them, good job they're already built at least, I really should have something of a plan going in. Now I've been painting for 30 years, more than, and I have quite the slap paint around and see what works kind of style. But this time, as I'm doing so many models in one go, I at least want a basic framework, a series of steps to follow, and so I had a quick look at some reference images, shock horror, and I found an image of an Imperial Japanese Army uniform that I quite liked, which I now can't actually find the original picture that I went with. Shame on me for not keeping track of that. There are of course many with greens and browns and khakis in different combinations, but the one that I liked that I'm going to follow has a darker brown trousers and a very light green shirt, and in the image the shirt was actually highlighted up pretty much into white, and that's all I needed. As I'm on the clock with this challenge, I have to paint fairly quickly with each step, and those main colours are going on with the airbrush. Firstly, the white, and I'm using a pure white ink, although this will be brought down a lot by the wash later on. I'm not even being neat at this point, I'm just making sure that the shirts are completely covered from the top and sides, and if I get overspray on the rest of it, doesn't matter because the other bits are going to be painted later anyway. Next up is kind of khaki or the light green that I'm using, and I know this is going to be muted down later and hopefully it will end up at least roughly in the right kind of colour that I like. And you'll notice I put the green on after the white, spraying from underneath. This is called an undershot. I quite liked how the undershot look worked for my Italians, and so I'm going to copy that and do the same here. I'm coating most of the shirts with this green, even covering over a lot of the white, and I'm going well above the 45 degree points that you would usually use for an undershot or a zenithal. For the next bit, I'm going to be at least a little bit careful as I'll be using the airbrush to paint the trousers, which touch right up against the bottom of the shirt, so overspray here is not going to be ideal. Now a little bit can look like the dirty edge of the shirt, and so that might be okay, but I really need to keep it minimal. And with this step, I am making a mistake that cost me quite a bit of time actually. You see, whilst I'm painting the trousers brown, well, the boots are probably also going to be brown, so why not do them at the same time? And then also, I'm going to be using brown as the base for my basing as well, and so why wouldn't I do all three in one go? And that should have all been one step, spraying from the bottom of the shirt all the way down to the base, but I ended up doing this in two separate steps with two different brown paints that ended up looking pretty much the same. And so I put down the airbrush, and with my first 2 hours gone, I moved over to use a real brush. Now, doing the airbrushing in 2 hours might seem like a long time, but remember that I've got 50 models that I'm working with, and I've just got the equivalent of my 2 thin coats, base coats, for the entire army done in those 2 hours. So I think that is a relatively efficient use of my time. Also, as we'll see, there's a few other models that snuck in, but I'll mention those later. And as soon as I moved on to a real brush, I was painting even more brown. So this is now a third step of brown paint. But unlike using the airbrush, these are the very thin, fiddly detail parts that are going to be painted brown. And a lot of these are hard to reach even with a physical brush. I wanted to be careful here, as if I messed up any of the airbrush work, it's going to be quite difficult to fix. So maybe I took a little bit extra time to paint these neatly, but also I'm still on the clock, so this is not going to be perfect. There's 50 models to do after all. There are a few different parts of these models that got this third layer of brown. The belts, the pouches, the rifle stocks and the sling, actually not just the rifle stocks but the entire rifle and anything that would be metal as well. And I also did some of the boots as well, if they didn't get much brown from the airbrushing step. And on some of them I painted the helmet strap. Now, to be diligent and organised, I fell into routine probably about a third of the way in. And that routine was to go from the top of the model down through each piece until I got to the bottom. So the helmet strap was first, which is probably why I missed them so much. Then it was the braces, the rifle, the belt and pouches, and lastly the boots. But it wasn't just the helmet straps that I missed. There was a couple that I missed the rifle of, and I looked back over the collection of models and was like, how did I miss that? So obvious. But when painting a batch of this size, you sort of have to expect that you're going to be making mistakes here and there. But when that mistake is, oh, I'll just paint over the entire rifle or whatever aspect of a model it is, you're not losing a great amount of time, and it's certainly not messing up any of your other work. But between those 50 models, it was well over an hour, in fact nearly an hour and a half. So probably getting on for 2 minutes per model, carefully painting each of these parts. Some of my long-time viewers have probably noticed that these models are wearing proper puttees and are just waiting for me to mention that. Well, here's the part where I mention that. Many of the image I found, in fact almost all of the images I found in my original search, showed the puttees being a very practical, dark, kind of muted dark green. And so I painted the puttees in a dark green. And later on I'll be applying a wash and that will mute them down quite nicely. I also used this exact same dark green on the helmets and on any of the models that have foliage. The camo netting on the sniper, and some of them have kind of little plants growing out of the bases. I was completely inconsistent with the foliage. There's only a few bits here or there, but just that little touch every now and again can be a visually interesting thing for a whole army. That actually didn't take very long at all, less than a minute per model, and it's only about 40 minutes. Whilst I was doing this, I realised I'm shuffling the models all over my desk with each step. Whenever I pick one up, I would put it down in a different place so that I knew that I'd painted that step on that particular model. But when I did the next step, I'd move that into a different place on the desk. I wouldn't just move it back to the place where they'd started off. And with no consistency in going back and forth, they just kind of wandered all over my desk over the course of the kind of few weeks that I was painting this. The next step is to base coat the skin, and I'm not painting them Simpsons yellow like some people do, but this will just be a quick 20 minutes. I'm surprised that the skin took so much less time than the puttees did. I'm essentially approaching the 5-hour mark right now, and I'm well into painting these models. And we have another very deliberate step to do here, and that is the metallics. The metalwork on World War II models is very limited, essentially tiny parts of the rifle, like the muzzle, barrel bands and trigger guards. But because I base coated the entire rifle with brown previously, I can pretty much just highlight each of these metallic parts, kind of consider it a highlight rather than a base coat. And that leaves tiny bits of brown in the recesses, which is going to be absolutely fine for that kind of slightly dirty but still relatively looked after rifle that a military rifle in the field would have. And that lets me move very quickly to paint the models and not needing to be perfectly neat, although I tried to make sure I wasn't painting any silver over the wooden parts of the rifles. There was of course some other weapons and bits of kit like the mortar ammunition, and that can still be fiddly, so a little bit of care was taken as I went. There's another half an hour spent, and after that a further half hour goes into throwing a wash over these models. Now in many cases a wash is a messy technique that requires a lot of cleanup afterwards. Tide marks, pooling, tearing, all sorts of things can happen with a wash. But in this case I'm using my own mix of an ink wash. And I've spent my time over the last few years to learn how to mix it specifically to create the effect I want. I'm making it a little bit thinner than normal and applying the wash quite heavily over the model, spreading it out, and then removing a lot of it while it's still wet, ensuring that there's no pooling or particularly dark recesses. Because as it dries it will pull into the recesses anyway, if I get my mix correct and my process followed, I should have a very nice filter on the upper surface, muting all of the colours in the model like I've mentioned before, and just a little bit of darkening those recesses, and thankfully it did actually work. Now it's not perfect and a little bit of cleanup was necessary, but nowhere near as much as with pre-mixed shop-bought washes that you can usually find. I left these to dry and then I quickly had a look over each model, and apparently I spent less than 30 seconds looking at each one to fix some of the shirts with that mix of green and some brown, which approximated the filter of the kind of the shirt with the wash over the top. And it doesn't have to be a perfect mix, it just has to look kind of clean enough to match the effect. Another 40 minutes now went into the skin, pretty much just the face and hands of each of the models. As I've got such a good effect from the wash over the base coat, I can actually save a lot of time here by shortchanging my usual steps of painting skin. I commonly paint skin with between 3 and 5 highlight layers, framing the parts of the skin and generally ruining it, kind of over painting skin. But here I'm maintaining the definition from the wash and only painting a single highlight layer. Strangely, by putting in less work and combining the techniques in this way, I actually ended up with a nicer result than I usually do. It's still not great, but it's perfectly serviceable for the wargaming table. And with the wash fully set, the skin is done, and kind of a lot of the details are done as well, I'm realizing that that uniform looks really, really good. The highlights aren't quite as good as I had intended, and certainly not as bright. But it looks good enough that I actually don't want to spoil it. I believe I have approached dangerously close to the slap chop painting style, which kind of makes me want to have a shower, but it also makes me want to just paint in a few subtle details to tidy things up and highlight elsewhere on the models, rather than bringing those shirts up any brighter. And so I went and found some of the heads that were wearing glasses, which may be a little bit of a stereotype, but they were soldiers wearing glasses in the Japanese army, and they just got a simple black outline, and then once that was done, a watered down blue-grey that once it dries, it's going to be slightly translucent and give almost a reflective glass look. This is more of a kind of a cartoonish impression of glass than a more detailed impression of glass, but it's going to kind of give that right effect. I went back over the foliage pieces as well, and these looked a little sad with only the base coat and wash, so they got a bit of a subtle edge highlight of sorts, going around with a light green to pick out their shape. There's one 3D printed model that has a rifle with a torn flag, a broken stock as well. So I painted the flag, and on my Kempertai, well, we'll see in a moment, but I thought I did a really good job on his armband. We'll come back to that. These final details and cleanup on really only a few of the models took about an hour in total. Well, we've actually got plenty of time left in my 24-hour challenge, and I think I can call the painting of these infantry models complete now. But whilst the models are painted, they are not based yet, so let's do that. And this is going to be, just like everything else today, very easy and very quick. With a few models having the odd plant here or there, I just needed a general ground cover, and I wanted that kind of more tropical island inland feel. And what better material than tea? I've had some dried leftover tea that's a little stale, and so I might as well make use of it for something else. But the tea by itself is extremely monochrome and dark. Now I thought about dry brushing it, but that would kind of rip up a lot of the tea without it being securely glued down, which is quite difficult to do. But my friend Ratman, not only did he give me the anti-tank rifle for today's video, but also had another thought and got me some dried mixed herbs from a well-known model shop. And as I started, the first few models got big patches of herbs, and then I threw the tea over everywhere else. I didn't really like how that was looking, and I wasn't sure why. For the next few models, I sprinkled a bit of the herbs and then the tea, and that kind of distribution helped a little bit. But it wasn't until I scooped up all of the overspill, reused that, effectively mixing the two types of ground cover together, that I had a look that I preferred. And all of the remaining models got this type of mix, with probably about a third of the mix being mixed herbs and 2/3 being the dried tea. And another roughly an hour went into the bases, or at least the ground cover of the bases, because I did the foliage 3D printed plants already. But then, just when I think I'm going on time and doing well, and I have an army that looks really nice, I go off to varnish the models. Now I'm in the habit of giving a quick single coat of a generic matte varnish, partially to protect the paint and partially actually to help the models appear consistent on video, because paint can be matte and shiny and look weird on in images and on video. But this time, my first spritz of varnish did something really nasty, probably because there was dried varnish in the nozzle from the last time I used it, and it sent a single blast of frosted dust. And my Kempertai got really hit bad, and that armband was completely frosted over. The model looked like a ghost. And a few other models got some minor impacts as well, but it was mainly the Kempertai that suffered here. Now I tried scrubbing these with water, which cleared it up perfectly until it dried and the white frosting came back. I tried with IPA and the same thing happens. And I didn't want to go to the extent of acetone stripping and having to completely repaint the models that were affected, and so I tried a few other tricks with some washes. Applying a brown wash over the top of this frosting helped a little bit, and once it dried, the white frosting came back and not as strongly as it had before. So I tried again by mixing some green paint, the same green paint that the shirts were originally painted in, with the brown wash for another layer, and that mix filled in the frosting, I'm guessing, with pigment, although it did lose a little bit of the detail because there's none of the airbrush highlight here. All of the other more simple features, like the belts, the metals, the trousers, and all of that kind of stuff, they just got a flat base coat, because at this point, with such small areas of these couple of models, the lost definition just doesn't matter. And well, that is the infantry done. But you may have noticed I've got loads and loads of time left, if you've been keeping track of the times that I've been saying through this video. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time painting some vehicles. You may have spotted the trucks and kurigane when I was doing the airbrushing, and they got exactly the same paints as the infantry, and it was just if I had some leftover paint when I was doing a particular colour, I would throw that on the truck, because at least then the trucks are getting painted along the way. And these two are just the Timu trucks, and therefore really don't deserve anything terribly complicated when it comes to painting. I'm just going to pick out a couple of details and then a wash will do. Tyres got grey, the windows got blue with a stippled blue-grey, and the window frames got black lining because everybody looks good in eyeliner, even trucks. Dousing these models with a wash a little more haphazardly than I had the infantry doesn't really matter, as this is going to look like dirt and rainwater going over the surface of the trucks. And I considered the trucks done at this point and just shifted for a little more detail on the Kurogane because that is a nicer model. But it actually wasn't that much more. There was some metallics to do, the headlights, and would you look at that, an edge highlight. Yes, of course I'm going to fit an edge highlight into this video at least once, if not twice. Certainly not a lot of work is going into these transport vehicles, and just about another hour or so here, not including the previous time on the airbrushes, which has already been counted. At this point, I'm actually still less than halfway through my 24-hour challenge, so I could almost paint another 50 infantry for this army. Now, I don't want to paint that many more infantry, but in the spare half of the time I have left, I might look at some of the other models that I have for the Japanese that aren't my infantry or transport vehicles. The first thing I turned to was some 20mm anti-aircraft cannons, and these I made with the wheels glued to the bases so that I can use them as an artillery kind of infantry gun. But I didn't glue the chassis, the carriage, to those wheels, so I can pop it out and pop them on the trucks to make an anti-aircraft vehicle. And those were painted really quickly, but when I applied the varnish to them, the exact same thing happened as to my Kempotai, except way worse. And the entire models were just absolutely frosted over. That can is going to the recycling centre because I'm not using it anymore. For these, I actually had to acetone, completely remove everything and repainted them from scratch. But as they're fairly small, it was actually only half an hour for the pair, so not that bad. There's also the 3 Shibito that I mentioned, and they had the various airbrush steps along with all of the other models in the army, and they had the wash as well. All they really need to finish these 3 up are the skin to be painted, but to do that, I want an unhealthy, unnatural skin colour, the kind of zombie skin colour. But also I don't want to use any colour that I've used on the uniforms on any of them. And as World War II uniforms are commonly brown, green and tan, well, I can't use any of that, so the classic green zombie skin isn't going to work. But purple? Well, that's perfect. And I really heavily desaturated this in the highlighting steps, but as there's just the face and skin for each of these 3 models, that just took a few minutes. Another model, actually quite a bigger model that I threw some extra time in, is my Chiha, but that will be coming in its own separate videos, so I actually don't want to spend too much of this video looking at it. And of course I also have the Conflict 47 models, but once again those will be in a separate video. And also I kind of wanted to keep this video fairly bolt action-y rather than Conflict 47-y, so let's skip over those for today. And that's it. The bolt action side of my army is now fully painted, and I'll probably add some more models here and there over the next few years, but for now it's all done and painted and ready for the tabletop. And they've come out pretty nicely actually, just as nice as my Italians and better than my Yanks and certainly better than my Brits. Let me know what you think in the comments sections below about this kind of mass batch painting an entire army in one go, and how I've used the techniques that I've learned over the years to make a very quick sequence of steps that gets me a nice enough look without a great deal of time. If you've been following my times during this video, and you'll have to generously round up because I've accounted for some of the interim times, like carrying models from room to room and cleaning the airbrush and varnishing, priming and all of that kind of stuff. My challenge was to fit all of this within 24 hours, and my total time, not including the stuff that's coming in other videos, is just about 12 hours. So that's pretty good, I think. I've spent half of the time that I was intending to on this army, and they're all done and ready for the table. But with that all said and wrapped up and ready to go, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.